Eleanor Nell Morrison was 31 years old when her neighbors told her that building a roof over her cabin was the most ridiculous idea they'd heard, proof that widows shouldn't make construction decisions without male guidance. It was July 1869 in Montana Territory near Virginia City, and the mining community had seen plenty of unconventional adaptations, but nobody extended their cabin roof 8 feet outward to create covered firewood storage directly attached to living quarters. Nell's husband, Thomas Morrison, had died in February 1869 from pneumonia that started after he spent 4 hours in a blizzard trying to reach their firewood pile, buried under 6-foot drifts 30 feet from the cabin. A death that was preventable, senseless, and entirely the result of conventional firewood storage design, failing during the exact conditions it was supposed to serve. The blizzard had started February 14th around noon, with temperature dropping from 20 degrees to 0 within an hour. Wind increased from calm to 40 miles per hour by 2 p.m. Snow began falling heavy and horizontal, driven by wind that created whiteout conditions where visibility was measured in feet, not yards. Thomas and Nell had been inside the cabin watching the weather deteriorate. They had firewood stacked inside near the stove, perhaps enough for 8 hours of continuous burning. Outside, 30 feet from the cabin door, they had their main supply, 3 cords properly cut and stacked in a dedicated firewood area, covered with canvas tarp for weather protection. By 4 p.m., the interior firewood was nearly exhausted and the blizzard showed no sign of moderating. Thomas made the decision that thousands of homesteaders made under similar circumstances: go outside, reach the firewood pile 30 feet away, bring back enough for the night. Straightforward task that should take perhaps 15 minutes in normal conditions. He dressed in heavy coat, wool scarf, thick gloves. Nell tied a rope around his waist with the other end secured to the cabin door handle. Standard safety practice so he couldn't become disoriented and lost in whiteout conditions 30 feet from home. He opened the door and stepped into the blizzard. The conditions were immediately worse than they'd appeared from inside. The wind was physically difficult to walk against. The horizontal snow made breathing difficult. Had to turn face away from wind to inhale without sucking snow into lungs. The cold bit through his heavy clothing within seconds, and most critically, the snow had drifted catastrophically between cabin and firewood pile. What had been flat ground with clear path in the morning was now waist-deep drifts. The 30 feet to the firewood pile required breaking trail through snow that resisted each step. Thomas would take a step forward, sink to his waist, pull his leading leg free, plant it ahead, repeat. Progress was measured in feet per minute rather than normal walking pace. He reached the firewood pile after perhaps 20 minutes of exhausting trail breaking. Found the tarp-covered stack buried under 4 feet of drift. The tarp had caught snow like sail, collapsing under weight and making everything worse rather than providing protection. He began digging through the drift to reach usable firewood beneath. The work was brutally hard, shoveling heavy wet snow with numb hands, fighting wind that immediately refilled what he'd cleared, trying to maintain body heat while stationary rather than moving. He spent 40 minutes digging before reaching wood he could actually grab and carry. Loaded his arms with perhaps 6 pieces, all he could carry while maintaining balance in deep snow and high wind. Began the return journey to cabin, following the rope that marked safe path. The rope was now buried under fresh drift, had to dig along its line to find it, follow it foot by foot back toward cabin. The return took longer than the outbound journey. He was exhausted from the digging, carrying heavy load through deep snow, fighting wind for an hour straight. His clothing was soaked with sweat from the exertion which was now freezing against his skin. His extremities were numb beyond feeling, feet, fingers, face all dangerously cold. He reached the cabin door after total exposure of approximately 90 minutes, stumbled inside, dropped the firewood, collapsed on the bed, shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia. Nell helped him out of frozen clothing, wrapped him in blankets, built up the fire with the wood he'd brought. The hypothermia passed after several hours, but the damage was done. The frozen sweat, the extended exertion in bitter cold, the deep body temperature drop, all contributed to respiratory infection that settled into his lungs within 2 days. Pneumonia developed despite Nell's nursing. Thomas died February 20th, 6 days after the blizzard, killed not by the storm itself, but by complications from exposure while accessing firewood 30 feet from the cabin. The tragedy left Nell alone in their 12 by 16 log cabin on a 40-acre claim 3 miles from Virginia City. She had the claim, the cabin, approximately 2 cords of firewood that Thomas had managed to bring inside before dying, and the clear understanding that firewood storage killed her husband not because they lacked fuel, but because the fuel was inaccessible during the exact conditions when it was most needed. She spent spring analyzing the problem and recognizing that conventional separate firewood storage was fundamentally dangerous in Montana winters. People built dedicated sheds or covered stacks positioned away from cabins to reduce fire risk. Then blizzards would bury those sheds, create impassable drifts between cabin and fuel, force desperate people to risk their lives traveling 30 feet through deadly conditions. The solution seemed obvious once she examined it clearly. Bring the firewood storage to the cabin rather than making people go to the storage. Extend the cabin's roof outward 8 feet, creating covered area directly attached to the structure. Stack firewood in this covered space, elevated off ground on platform. Access the firewood by simply opening the cabin door and stepping 2 feet into covered area. Total exposure perhaps 5 seconds rather than minutes fighting through drifts. The design crystallized through June. Extend the existing cabin roof on the south side 8 feet outward. Support the extension with vertical posts, creating covered lean-to space 8 feet deep by 16 feet long. Build elevated pole platform in this space for firewood storage. Leave the sides open for ventilation and access. The extended roof would shed rain and snow. The attachment to cabin meant accessing firewood required stepping outside for seconds, not minutes. The elevated platform would prevent ground moisture. The open sides would prevent condensation buildup. The community's reaction when Nell explained the plan ranged from mockery to genuine concern. She was planning to build a shed over her cabin, attaching firewood storage directly to living quarters, violating basic fire safety principles, creating ugly addition that would make her cabin look ridiculous, wasting money on construction when she could simply stack firewood closer to the door. Robert Chen, age 42, a successful mining engineer and informal leader of the Virginia City area Chinese community who'd helped many settlers with construction advice, tried to explain the problems with Nell's design in early July. "Mrs. Morrison," he said respectfully, "firewood storage must be separated from living quarters because of fire risk. You're proposing to attach it directly to your cabin wall. One stray spark from your chimney landing in stored firewood could burn your entire home with you inside. The storage area is 8 feet from the cabin wall where the chimney exits," Nell countered. "The firewood is under roof overhang, not directly against the wall. Rain and snow keep wood naturally damp on exterior surfaces. The actual fire risk is minimal compared to the death risk of inaccessible fuel during blizzards." "What about appearance?" asked Margaret Wilson, age 38, a practical woman who nonetheless valued proper aesthetics. "Your cabin will look like you built a lean-to shed attached to the side. It's not conventional architecture. People will think you don't know proper construction." "I don't care about conventional architecture," Nell said flatly. "I care about surviving winter without dying trying to reach firewood. Thomas died because our fuel was 30 feet away during a blizzard. If it had been 3 feet away under attached roof, he'd be alive. I'll accept ugly over dead." "You could stack firewood against the cabin wall," suggested Chen, offering compromise. "Cover it with tarp, Same accessibility without building expensive roof extension. Tarp-covered stacks still get buried under drifting snow, Nell explained. Still require digging out during storms, still create exposure risk. Extended roof prevents snow accumulation directly against cabin, creates truly protected space accessible in any weather, worth the construction cost. She proceeded with her plan, despite the mockery and warnings. Hired 2 laborers from Virginia City for 3 days at $2 per day each to help with the heavy timber work, the only expense she couldn't handle alone with her limited physical strength. Construction began in mid-July and required modifying existing structure while maintaining weather protection, the most challenging aspect since she couldn't simply tear off the roof and rebuild, but had to extend it carefully while keeping the cabin livable. The cabin's south wall had the existing roof extending perhaps 6 inches beyond the wall as basic overhang. She needed to extend that roof an additional 8 feet outward, creating covered space, while ensuring the joint between old and new sections remained weatherproof and structurally sound. The support structure used 6 vertical posts, 4x4 pine timbers 8 feet tall that would bear the outer edge of the extended roof. She set them 3 feet into ground for stability, meaning 11 feet total length. Had to dig post holes through rocky Montana soil using iron bar and shovel. Brutal work that took 2 full days working dawn to dusk. The holes needed to be precise, 3 feet deep, positioned exactly 8 feet out from the cabin wall, spaced properly to align with cabin rafters. She'd dig each hole, test fit the post, adjust depth and position until perfect, then backfill with earth and rocks tamped solid. Positioned the 6 posts in 2 rows of 3 each, spaced approximately 6 feet apart along the 16-foot cabin length. The posts created rectangle 8 feet deep by 16 feet long, the footprint of the covered storage area. Once set and tested for plumb, she notched the top of each post to receive the extended rafters that would span from cabin to posts. The roof extension was the critical technical challenge. The cabin's existing roof consisted of log rafters running from ridgepole down to the wall top, covered with cross poles and sod. She needed to extend each rafter outward 8 feet, maintaining the roof's existing slope so water and snow would shed properly. Her hired laborers, 2 experienced carpenters from Virginia City, arrived for this phase. The technique they developed: carefully remove several courses of sod from the cabin roof edge to expose the rafter ends. Cut additional pole sections 8 feet long to serve as rafter extensions. Lap these extension poles over the existing rafter ends by approximately 2 feet, creating strong overlapping joint. Secure the lapped joint using multiple techniques simultaneously. First, bore holes through both the existing rafter and extension pole in the overlap zone using auger. Drive wooden pegs through these holes, creating mechanical connection. Second, wrap the joint tightly with wet rawhide strips that would shrink as they dried, creating enormous clamping force. Third, nail through the joint at angles using large spikes, preventing any movement. The triple secured joint was remarkably strong, actually stronger than either pole individually, because the overlap distributed loads across both members. Testing one joint before committing to all rafters, they found they could hang their combined body weight from the extension without the joint shifting or showing signs of failure. Once confident in the technique, they proceeded to extend all 8 cabin rafters. The work required 3 people, 2 on the roof handling the heavy poles and securing joints, Nell on ground preparing materials, passing tools up via rope, and watching for problems. Each rafter extension took approximately 90 minutes to cut, fit, and secure properly. By end of the second day, all 8 rafters were extended, creating continuous structural members running from the cabin's ridgepole out to the support posts, 8 feet beyond the wall. The extended rafters sat in the notches cut into the post tops, distributing roof load to the posts and through them to the ground. They laid cross poles perpendicular to the extended rafters, spacing them approximately 18 inches apart. These created the roof deck that would support the sod covering. The cross poles were lighter material, 3-inch diameter pine poles that 2 people could handle easily. Nell helped with this phase, working on the lower portions of the roof, while the hired men handled the higher sections requiring ladder work. The final roof covering used fresh-cut sod blocks from nearby prairie. Nell had cut these in advance, strips of earth bound together by grass roots, approximately 12 inches wide, 3 feet long, 4 inches thick. Each block weighed 40 pounds and provided both waterproofing and insulation. They laid the sod, starting at the bottom edge of the extended roof and working upward. Each block overlapped the one below it, creating shingle effect that shed water. The grass side faced upward, so the roots would continue growing, eventually knitting all the blocks together into continuous living roof mat. The joint where new sod covering met existing cabin roof was carefully integrated. Removed the bottom course of old sod, laid new sod blocks overlapping onto the existing roof deck, then replaced old sod overlapping the new. The result was weatherproof joint with no visible seam. New and old sections appeared as continuous roof. The entire roof extension took 3 full days with 3 people working, $16 total labor cost, including the 2 hired carpenters at $2 daily, each, plus Nell's labor preparing materials and assisting. The floor platform in the covered space used straight pine poles, approximately 4 inches diameter, cut from nearby timber. Laid them parallel with 2-inch gaps between poles, supported 18 inches above ground by short posts. The elevated platform kept firewood off ground, preventing moisture wicking, while gaps allowed air circulation and drainage. By early August, the construction was complete. The cabin now had 8-foot deep covered area attached to its south wall, essentially a lean-to shed integrated with the cabin structure. Total cost was $18. $12 for hired labor, $4 for rope and nails, $2 for tools she didn't own. She began stacking her firewood in the covered space, building organized rows on the elevated platform. The wood was summer-seasoned, ready to burn efficiently if kept dry through winter. The first rain test came in mid-August, 2 inches of rain over 6 hours. Nell watched the extended roof perform, checking for leaks where new section joined old cabin roof. The rain ran down the continuous roof slope, shed off the extended edge 8 feet from the cabin wall. No drips penetrated into the covered storage area. The firewood stayed completely dry. The structure's appearance was exactly as unconventional as predicted. The cabin looked like it wore a hat with brim extending on one side, the extended roof creating obvious asymmetry. Neighbors would ride past and comment to each other about the widow's odd shed or Morrison's roof mistake. Through autumn, as occasional rain and early snow fell, the extended roof shed precipitation perfectly and the firewood remained dry. But the real test would come during winter, when blizzards created the conditions that killed Thomas. The first major blizzard arrived December 6th, 3 days of heavy snow and 50-mile-per-hour wind that created drifts, burying everything not directly protected, conditions nearly identical to the February storm that killed Thomas, and the ultimate test of whether Nell's extended roof shed would prevent the tragedy from repeating. The storm began December 6th, around 10 a.m. with temperature at 15 degrees dropping rapidly. Wind increased from light breeze to sustained 40 miles per hour with gusts exceeding 60. Snow began falling at rate of 2 inches per hour, heavy wet flakes driven nearly horizontal by the wind. Visibility dropped to 20 feet by noon, 10 feet by 2 p.m., essentially zero by evening. Nell watched from inside her cabin as the storm intensified. Her firewood was stacked under the extended roof in the covered area attached to the south wall. The structure was about to face exactly the conditions that had buried Thomas's firewood pile under 6 feet of drift. The extended roof performed exactly as designed through the storm's evolution. Snow would fall at steep angle driven by the horizontal wind, but the solid roof overhead prevented it from accumulating in the covered storage area. Snow that hit the roof would stick briefly, then slide down the slope, falling to ground 8 feet out from the cabin wall. Wind would blow through the open sides of the covered area, but couldn't deposit snow when there was no vertical surface to catch against. By evening of the first day, approximately 10 inches of snow had fallen. Nell opened her cabin door and looked into the covered area. Found it completely clear, the elevated platform visible, firewood stacked dry and accessible, no snow accumulation anywhere in the protected space. Meanwhile, looking out past the extended roof's edge, she could see drifts building in the open areas where wind created swirling patterns that deposited snow in massive piles. She selected several pieces of firewood, carried them inside, all in perhaps 15 seconds of exposure. No shoveling required, no path clearing needed. Access was as easy during active blizzard as during calm weather. The storm continued through December 7th and 8th, adding another 20 inches of snow. Wind sculpted this into drifts reaching 6 to 8 feet in exposed areas. The entire landscape transformed into white chaos, where landmarks disappeared under uniform snow cover and any structure not protected was buried. Robert Chen's household experienced the blizzard from conventional separate storage perspective. Their firewood shed was well-built structure 40 feet from the cabin, positioned that distance for fire safety, proper construction with solid roof and walls, 3 cords of wood stacked inside. The shed represented best practices in firewood storage based on conventional wisdom. By evening of December 7th, the shed was buried under drift approaching 6 feet depth. The door was completely obscured. The structure was visible only as slight mound in the snow-covered landscape. Accessing the firewood inside required major excavation effort during active blizzard conditions. Chen attempted the access on morning of December 8th. Temperature was 5 degrees, with wind still gusting to 40 miles per hour. He dressed in heaviest winter clothing, took snow shovel, opened his cabin door, and began the journey to the shed. The 40-foot distance required breaking trail through waist-to-chest-deep drifts. Each step was exhausting effort. Post hole through the snow, extract leading leg, plant it ahead, repeat. Progress was perhaps 1 foot per minute. The wind made breathing difficult. The cold penetrated his clothing within minutes. The physical exertion was severe enough that he sweated despite the temperature. He reached the vicinity of the shed after 20 minutes of brutal trail breaking, began excavating the drift covering the door, shoveled heavy wet snow, while wind immediately tried to refill what he cleared. The work was back-breaking, hand-numbing, face-freezing labor that continued for 90 minutes before he could actually open the shed door and access the firewood inside. Total exposure time approximately 2 hours. During that exposure, his fingers developed frostbite, the tissue damage occurring when blood flow to extremities drops too low to maintain living temperature. 3 fingers on his left hand showed white patches indicating frozen tissue. The injury would require weeks to heal, involved severe pain as circulation returned, and created permanent sensitivity to cold in the affected fingers. He loaded his arms with as much wood as possible. Couldn't face making this trip daily, needed to bring enough for 3 days. Carried perhaps 40 pounds of firewood back through the trail he'd broken, arriving at his cabin exhausted, frostbitten, soaked with frozen sweat, and hypothermic enough that his wife had to help him out of his clothing and warm him by the fire. The physical and medical toll was severe enough that Chen avoided making another firewood retrieval trip for 3 days, burning the wood sparingly to make it last. When he did make the next trip, the trail had filled in, requiring the same excavation effort repeated. By end of winter, he'd made approximately 20 trips to the firewood shed, each requiring 1 to 2 hours of exposure, accumulating cold-related injuries and exhaustion that degraded his overall health. Margaret Wilson's household faced similar or worse conditions. Their firewood stack was 30 feet from cabin, covered with tarp for protection. The tarp, rather than helping, had caught snow like a sail. The weight of accumulated snow collapsed the tarp onto the firewood, creating compacted mass that was harder to dig through than simple drift would have been. Her husband attempted access December 7th afternoon, spent 90 minutes digging through the collapsed tarp and drift to reach usable wood, developed severe hypothermia from the extended exposure. Core body temperature dropped enough that he became confused and disoriented, couldn't properly tie his boots when returning to cabin, spoke incoherently for several hours after warming. He recovered after 3 days of bed rest, but couldn't repeat the effort safely. They began burning furniture, chairs, a small table, interior wallboards, to supplement the limited firewood they'd managed to retrieve. By spring, their cabin interior was partially dismantled from burning structural elements for fuel. Nell's extended roof shed required no such sacrifices or suffering. Throughout the 3-day blizzard and the weeks following, she accessed her firewood supply by opening her cabin door, stepping 2 feet into the covered area that remained completely clear, selecting wood from the dry stack and returning inside. Total exposure per trip, 10 to 15 seconds. Total physical effort, walking 2 feet and picking up firewood. Total injury risk, essentially 0. The difference wasn't subtle. It was the difference between hypothermia and comfort, between frostbite and healthy hands, between exhausting, dangerous labor and simple, easy access, between burning furniture and having adequate fuel, between 2 hours exposure and 10 seconds exposure. The efficiency and safety difference was so dramatic that neighbors began visiting after the blizzard ended to understand how Nell had maintained easy fuel access while they'd nearly died trying to reach theirs. Chen arrived December 10th, 4 days after the blizzard ended, showing bandaged fingers from frostbite. Found Nell comfortable in her cabin with adequate firewood supply. No injuries, no crisis survived. "You had no trouble accessing your firewood during the blizzard," Chen said, processing the implications of what seemed impossible. 3 days of heavy snow and 50-mile wind. My shed was buried. I nearly lost fingers trying to reach it. Your firewood under extended roof was accessible the entire time. Nell invited him to examine the system. They walked outside where the extended roof created obvious covered area attached to cabin's south wall. The space beneath was completely clear of snow, protected by the overhead roof, elevated platform preventing drifting from below, open sides allowing wind to pass through without depositing snow. Extended roof prevents snow accumulation, Nell explained. Wind blows through horizontal but can't deposit vertical snow when there's solid roof overhead. Elevation prevents ground drifting. Open sides allow wind passage without creating eddy currents that would deposit snow. The firewood stays accessible regardless of surface conditions. Chen examined the attachment point where extended roof joined cabin roof, had expected to find crude joint that would leak. Instead, found well-executed continuation. The extended rafters aligned perfectly with original rafters, sod covering continuous across both sections, no visible seam where one ended and other began. You integrated new roof with existing structure rather than creating separate addition, Chen observed. The extended section is part of cabin roof, not shed built against it. This is actually sophisticated construction disguised as simple addition. And the access, Nell continued, is measured in seconds, not minutes. During that blizzard, I'd open my door, reach into covered area, grab wood, return inside, perhaps 10 seconds of exposure. You spent 2 hours shoveling and transporting. The difference between 10 seconds and 2 hours is the difference between safe and deadly. My frostbite came from extended exposure during fuel access, Chen said, looking at his bandaged hand. If my storage had this design, I'd have no injury. The conventional separate storage everyone uses is dangerous, specifically during the conditions when fuel is most critical. By spring 1870, 9 households in the Virginia City area had built extended roof sheds attached to their cabins. The construction was moderately complex, required working on existing roofs, extending rafters properly, maintaining weatherproof joints. But the safety and convenience benefits were worth the effort and cost. Nell became informal consultant, helped neighbors plan roof extensions, advised on rafter alignment and attachment, designed ventilation systems for different cabin orientations. Was paid in labor barter, sometimes food, occasionally small amounts of cash. The income and respect exceeded anything she'd had as simply Thomas's widow. She lived in the cabin with extended roof shed for 23 years, from 1869 to 1892, when she sold the claim and moved to Helena. The structure remained functional through those years, requiring only occasional sod roof maintenance that any structure needed. Nell lived until 1926, dying at age 88. Her obituary mentioned her widowhood and her homesteading, but focused primarily on the extended roof shed. The design that proved accessible fuel mattered more than separated fuel, and that 10 seconds exposure was survivable while 2 hours exposure killed. Modern analysis of similar attached storage designs confirmed the snow management principles: extended roof preventing vertical accumulation, elevated platform preventing ground drifting, open sides allowing wind passage without deposition, resulting in protected space accessible in all weather conditions that buried conventional separate storage. The story is about a widow who understood that her husband didn't die from lack of fuel. He died from inaccessible fuel. Who recognized that fire safety concerns about attached storage were less dangerous than exposure risks from separated storage. Who proved that the safest firewood isn't in the best shed. It's in the shed you can reach without dying. Because sometimes survival is about seconds of exposure rather than minutes. The shed over the cabin everyone called ridiculous was actually life-saving engineering. And choosing ugly over dead wasn't compromise. It was wisdom.